Hello and welcome to Old and New Turkey, part of Ahval video and podcast series. My guest, as always, in this series is Professor Gökhan Bacık from Palacký University in Czech Republic. Welcome, Gökhan.
Hey, hello, Yavuz.
Good to see you again. There are some subjects to analyze, to bring forth as to the attention. That has to do with foreign policy, of course. One is the situation in Afghanistan, the advances of Taliban, which seems unstoppable. And second one is the developments in Tunisia. Let's, if you will, begin with the Afghanistan developments, if that is fine with you.
Yeah.
Well, as I mentioned, the Taliban is conquering one settlement after the other, and as far as now, more than 9 cities and provinces have been captured by Taliban forces. And as a consequence, there is an outflow of Afghan refugees via Iran to Turkey mainly. And this has, of course, put more kerosene in the fire in Turkey in the discussions about how to approach the refugees in the country. Thousands of Afghanis entering Turkish soil, of course, became another turning point. How should we see to this development? It seems the Biden-Erdoğan meeting, tete-a-tete meeting, has something to do with it. Of course, the agreement, which is not implemented yet, about the control of Kabul airport by Turkish forces is in the picture. But now, as it appears, there's more than that.
Well, to be honest, we have no, concrete data about the content of the deal between Turkey and U.S. Biden administration. But let me start with the Turkish public opinion, how the issue is interpreted. To a large extent, Turkish people think that the recent influx of people from Afghanistan is a result of a kind of deal between Erdoğan and Biden administration. So it also fuels the already anti-Americanism in the country, and probably Turkey stands as one of the most anti-American in terms of public feeling in the region. Maybe it competes with some countries like Iran. Quite a fantastic and ironic case. Recently, I watched a TV channel in Turkey, CNN Turk, where there's a guy who's talking about US as super terrorist state from even it's a Turkish channel with American brand CNN. So, woo. Well, the point is, I think this issue has 2 important dimensions. One is the Turkish-American relations. We all know that there's a deal between Turkish government and US about Kabul airport. To some extent, I think even in the beginning, President Erdoğan was nervous about Biden. He tested him. And I think he almost concluded that even Biden is very negative about Erdoğan, he can work with him. I think Erdoğan is in a process to realize that even Americans are not happy with his regime, authoritarianism. There are some ways, as usual, the strategic opportunities or the problems, the strategic commons, that may help Erdoğan. So Erdoğan is now re-updating itself towards American administration. So he is now more thinking of US as he's thinking of Brussels, because we know that he's the master of this kind of deals on refugee issue in the last 5 years, part of Syrian refugees. So this is the first point, but this is critical because this creates a kind of frustration among some pro-Western people in Turkey, because they now imagine US in a kind of deal with Erdoğan, Kabul airport or Turkish democracy. So this is a quite, this is the symbolic way to summarize how some people, because there are some people in Turkey who have expectations from the West, not only US, but Brussels, European Union, Germany. But now we have this understanding in Turkey that even some people who had previously some expectation from Biden administration are now thinking that Biden is also following the same strategic path, which is to go through some kind of strategic problems like the Kabul airport. I don't know how it is important, or maybe, as you mentioned, the refugee issue. But this is a bit interesting because many people think it's because of the deal with US government. this time, even the opposition parties are becoming anti-American. So in the case of AKP, we have Erdoğan.
Were they not already anti-American?
They are already,
to
but
begin
this
with?
time, well, before Afghan refugee problem, of course they are nationalists, but this gives them an opportunity to compete with Erdoğan through anti-Americanism. Before, they were anti-American, but it didn't help them in politics. But now, even I'm not happy about that, the refugee issue is something you can challenge Erdoğan, because many people in Turkey, because of economic problems, because of nationalism, even including racism, there is a very, if I may say, 90% of Turkish people are against any kind of refugee. So this creates, ironically, huge opportunity zone for the opposition. But in the meantime, they also compete Erdoğan in anti-Americanism. So if you summarize any debate on the refugee issue in Turkey, you see that the opposition, the government, Erdoğan, everyone is talking about the West in a very negative way. So it's quite complex. And in this case, this is something for Turkish-American relations in the long term. Turkey is becoming seriously with a new sociology, with a very serious anti-Western, particularly anti-American. This is the first point. So the second is maybe we should be also a bit realistic about the situation, because Turkey, historically speaking, Yavuz, Turkey's society was the so-called post-Ottoman society, which was the sum of some people from Balkans, small groups from Caucasia, but largely Anatolian population. But what we are observing right now, the traditional Turkish society is changing. Turkey is now a Turkish, Arab, and Kurdish state. There are millions of Syrians, at least 5 million, and plus Afghanistan. So the sociology of Turkey Turkish society is changing. So it is no longer the post-Ottoman Turkish social structure we have. It's radically different, and which means that.
And you call it a mixture of Turkish, Arab, and Kurdish.
Yeah, well, technically speaking, before the Arab Spring, we used to call Turkey as Turkish, Kurdish, and plus. Plus means Georgians, Circassians, but they're all in small size. But now, technically speaking, Turkey is a Turkish, Kurdish, Arabic state. Because at this we have 5 million, and I should remind that there are already Turkish Arab citizens living in Hatay, Mardin. So if you imagine all the Arabs as a group from ethnic perspective, Turkey is becoming Turkish, Arabic, Kurdish state. And we don't know how its applications in the long term. I mean, it's not an easy question. But
it's an ongoing trend.
Ongoing trend. This is important because we are talking about transformation of Turkey in terms of institution from Kemalism to Islam, but more critical, at least equally critical, which is a rare event in political science, because it is comparatively easy to observe societies changing their system institutions. But in the case of Turkey, very rare example, that is, we are also observing society itself changing demographically. So Turkey is, and this is important because there is probably another 1 million Afghans in Turkey then. Think about that. And the problem is this radical change happening when Turkey is in a crisis of institutions, which means modern state is already eroded. Turkey is not able to follow a strict settlement policy. It's happening random. So Afghans, Syrians may end up in any town in Turkey, which means then that's why, for example, nobody could imagine that a province in western part of Turkey, Bolu, became the champion of anti-Syrian.
Or anti-refugee.
Anti-refugee. It's quite symbolic, which means that nobody could imagine that. I mean, you can expect in Antep, for example, Kilis or some nationalist cities such as maybe Izmir. But the problem right now that we are observing in Bolu province is
which is for our viewers a province just east of Ankara province, the capital province, just in the middle of Anatolia.
It's a Western Black Sea region, Black Sea.
West of Ankara.
Yeah, west of Ankara, Western Black Sea region. It shows that the penetration of Syrians in Turkey is quite complex. It's beyond control. So then it complicates the problem because accepting refugees is, of course, a positive value, positive norm. But in the meantime, there must be a modern state structure that that can simultaneously practice a kind of settlement policy, which is not happening in Turkey. So far, we have been talking about Turkey regime change, institutional change, erosion of modern state, but this time the demography is changing very quickly, which normally happens in a long term. Less than 10 years, we're observing that Turkey is becoming a Turkish Arab state as well.
So we see this perspective with, as you mentioned, unknown repercussions in terms of demographic change and sociological change, political change as well. What is Erdogan's goal here? What does he must have foreseen these changes, these repercussions already upcoming. He's a very sharp-eyed politician. What is the end game of his?
Well, I think Erdogan's strategy is quite simple. He knows that Turkey is very divided, and populism is the only way for him. From now on, nobody expects that Erdogan will come up with some kind of short-term successes in economy. Economy is desperate in Turkey. So he must follow a way which helps in radicalizing these social fault lines. He knows that no matter what economy is, how the economy is, there is a very solid constituency behind him. So he's in a state of absolute cultural politics. He wants to contextualize the refugee problem also within this context. But the missing point, as I say in the beginning, for Erdogan, it's also a business. Refugee issue is a part of financial deal with European Union.
It's always been.
So the question is, if he is able to incorporate Afghani dimension within that context. We all know that in the last 3 or 4 weeks, leading European leaders made some statements that they imagine Turkey also a kind of peripheral state in this way, like Syria. So this may help Erdogan, because Erdogan is a typical trading mentality. So if he's convinced that there is an economic opportunity for Afghans, then he will go for that, no doubt about that, because Erdogan is a mixture of Islamism and pragmatism. So pragmatism will lead him for looking for money through the issue. But on the other hand, Islamism, they believe that they can influence Afghanistan, they can digest Afghani people. The point is that when I look carefully, I don't see that alarming among Islamists about the Afghans, just unlike the Kemalists. The only problem here is his typical headache, classical headache, is nationalist party, because they are not happy about these Afghans, So we should first understand whether this Afghani influx is really because of its own dynamics, or there's a deal behind that. I mean, the deal between, possible deal between US and European Union or Turkey. So we are yet to know the main dynamic that to determine Erdogan understanding of refugee problem.
We should also add that these demographic changes seem to be happening also in North Cyprus, according to the independent North Cyprus press. There is now a development taking shape about giving North Cyprus breakaway republic citizenship to the settlers coming from Turkey, more and more geometrically increasing in numbers. And this has caused a lot of stir blend among the natives, Turk Cypriots. We should also add that. So it might perhaps be put in the bigger context, or the context that you are talking about in this case. So let's move to a related issue somewhat, the changes that took place in Tunisia, the closure of the parliament, or freezing of the parliament, to be more exact, and also targeting the Ikhwan derivative and Nahda, basically in this turmoil, and Turkey's reaction. How should we see from the prism of observation in terms of Turkey-Tunisia relations, and in terms of political Islam?
Well, there is no doubt that for Erdogan, it's another development that makes them very unhappy. So for Islamists in Turkey, the fall of Tunisia is another in the chain of events development that well,
loss of a bastion.
That's right. Yeah, because Ghannouchi, even he was a moderate, quite close to Erdogan. Mm-hmm. I should remind you, it was among the few countries that extradited Gülen members, for example. So from AKP perspective, it is alarming. But this is not new, because since Gezi, if you look back to very origin, in the very beginning, AKP and Islamists welcome Arab Spring in the region as a great historic event. We still keep their articles in our archives because they were expecting that people finally destroying secular authoritarian regimes. But two developments changed their mindset. The first is Egypt, Sisi. The second is the Gezi. When it happened also in Turkey, this time they reinterpret Arab Spring as something, as an imperial, as a colonial and neo-colonial project aiming at themselves. Mm-hmm. And then in that process, Tunisia comes as the final phase. So they feel themselves isolated, losing another bastion, as you want. But the problem is Erdogan is weak in domestic politics in terms of economy, and he's trying to make a balance with US. Thus, he follows, let's say, a two-level game or two-level policy. One is in domestic. He repeats the same Islamist jargon, supporting Islamists in Tunisia, and the intermediaries of Islamist intermediaries around Erdogan immediately translated the event as a coup. So it was another coup against Islamists. But in foreign policy, Erdogan was very careful, typical pragmatist and realist in that sense. He spoke with the Tunisian president, and what I observe from that dialogue is Erdogan is trying to not to lose every connection with Tunisia, because it will be completely disaster for Erdogan. Then, if you exclude some countries like Qatar, then the only place that Erdogan can survive is foreign policy in some military areas such as Libya. So it's a kind of isolation. So Erdogan is trying to, let's say, manage the case with a low cost. But on the other hand, for Turkish Islamism, Tunisia is as highly symbolic. It creates it consolidates the feeling that now we are the target. Okay, it's something like, it's a kind of international conspiracy targeting one by one each revolutionary process, and this time we are naked. Okay, there is no other state before us. So it probably, the Tunisian event is gonna radicalize Islamism in Turkey in terms of their understanding of foreign policy. I'm not saying that their ideology. So they will be much more critical, much more alarmed about that. But as I said, in domestic politics, because Erdogan has been able to, let's say, put his constituents in a kind of ideological balloon in which he can orient their understanding as he wishes. So he keeps pumping them the idea of Erdogan is fighting the coup in Tunisia, is fighting, imperialism in Libya, so on and so forth. But in foreign policy, I think he has no option but try to continue his connections with Tunisian government.
So this brings us to the final question, which is sort of a conclusion. You mentioned Turkey as a consequence of such developments becoming a peripheral state. What does it mean in terms of Turkey's relations with the EU, European Union, and the USA?
Well, what I mean by peripheral is, in the past, Turkey is a country which is trying to be equal partner of the West, so-called Western club. And this is not about Turkish Republic. We have this long story since mid-19th century. There were some key meetings between Ottomans and Europeans, the Berlin Conference, the Vienna Congress. Accordingly, the goal of Turkish foreign policy was to become part of Europe, which means not only security, but other issues such as culture, economy, also to determine relations between Turkey and the West.
And the legal system as well.
Legal system as well, human rights. I mean, it was not like only about security issues or economy. So it was a kind of a process where the game envisaged both sides embracing each other in a perfect way. But in the new system, the problem is the Turkey today has a regime which cannot embrace but by Europe. It's very clear. On the other hand, there is no way to change that. So the solution is, if I may use the physical term, resultant is, let's accept Turkey as it is, but transforming Turkey into a peripheral state, which means Turkey is no longer trying to become equal part of West, but a country which is in a kind of bargain, sometimes based on security, sometimes economic interest, to help Europe on some secondary issues, such as refugees, for example, or such as security. It might be about Russia or Ukraine. The irony is even it is not a, it is a very it's compared to the historical background, it's not a very good category to be a peripheral state. But the problem is there is a government in Turkey who is ready to buy that status because it helps them in their survival. So Turkey is a country, peripheral country, which means that we are here authoritarian. We no longer put pressure on you to become equal partner with you. It's a longer story. It's an old story. Nobody cares about that. In exchange for that, we help you on security issues. We help you on, for example, gas issues. Okay, secondary issues. By secondary, I don't mean they're not important, but they're not about identity. They are not about becoming equal part with the West. So this is peripheral, which means that in the long term, there is a risk, Yavuz. The risk is for Europe, accepting Turkey as a peripheral state may help them in the short term because Turkey stops refugees, Turkey stops so on and so forth. But in the long term, there's a risk. Peripheral status may transform Turkey another unstable country, just like Iran, just like Egypt. Then in the long term, it may help in the short term, but there is a risk that this peripheral status is eroding modern state.
And it becomes permanent.
It may become permanent. Then in the long term, Europeans may realize that, okay, a strategy which helped them in the past, in the short term, is a now complicated and long-term headache.
Professor Gökhan Bacık, thank you for this conversation, for this analysis as part of the series Old and New Turkey. Thank you for joining me.
My pleasure.